Demian, chapter 5, The Bird Fights Its Way Out of the Egg. My painted dream bird was on its way in search of my friend. Then, in the strangest way, an answer came back to me. One day in class, after a break between lessons, I found a note stuck in the book on my desk. It was folded exactly the way my classmates typically folded the notes they would occasionally pass during class. I wondered only who might have given it to me, since I had never had that kind of friendship with any of my classmates. I thought it must be an invitation to join in on some kind of schoolboy prank, which I wouldn't do anyway. And I stuck the note unread in the front of my book. Only later, during the lesson, by chance, did my hand come across it again. I played with the sheet of paper, unfolded it without thinking, and found a few words written inside. I glanced at it, my eyes rested on one of the words, and I read the note in shock while my heart clenched as though freezing cold at this new turn of fate. The bird fights its way out of the egg. The egg is the world. Whoever wants to be born must destroy a world. The bird flies to God. The God is called Abraxas. I read these lines over and over and sank deep into thought. There could be no doubt. It was an answer from Demian. No one knew about the bird except him and me. My picture had reached him. It had understood, he had understood, and was helping me interpret it. But how did everything fit together? And what tormented me most of all, what did Abraxas mean? I had never heard or read the word before in my life. The god is called Abraxas. The lesson went by without my hearing a word. Then the next class started, the last class of the afternoon. It was taught by a young assistant teacher, Dr. Folan, only recently out of university. We liked him for just that reason, because he was so young and didn't put on airs with us. He was taking us through Herodotus, one of the few subjects in school that truly interested me, but this time I couldn't pay any attention to it. I had mechanically opened my book, but I didn't follow the translation and remained sunk in thought. Incidentally, I had already confirmed for myself many times over how true what Demian had told me in confirmation class was. Whatever you wanted strongly enough happened. Whenever I was deeply occupied with my own thoughts during class, I could relax and know the teacher would leave me alone. If you were distracted or drowsy, then he would suddenly be standing there. True. That had happened to me as well. But when you were really concentrating, really lost in thought, you were protected. I had also tried out his trick of the fixed stare and found it reliable too. Back when I was in school with Demian, it had not worked for me. Now I often had reason to feel that there was a lot you could do with your gaze and with your thoughts. That time, too, I sat there a million miles away from Herodotus and from school. But then the teacher's voice unexpectedly shot into my consciousness like a bolt of lightning, and I snapped awake in panic. I heard his voice. He was standing right next to me, and I even thought he had called my name. But he was not looking at me. I breathed easier. Then I heard his voice again. It loudly pronounced the word Abraxas. Dr. Folan went on with his explanation, the beginning of which I had missed. We must not imagine the views of these ancient sects and mystic communities as naive, the way they might seem from a rationalistic perspective. Science, in our sense of the word, was unknown to antiquity, but in return they engaged in a very advanced way with philosophical and mystical truths. These pursuits gave rise to magic spells and other such trickery to some extent, but no doubt to crime and deception often enough too. But even this magic had a noble heritage and embodied profound thought. For example, the teachings of Abraxas I just mentioned. This name is mentioned in connection with Greek magic formulas and is often considered the name of some kind of magical devil, like the ones savage tribes still believe in today. But Abraxas seems to mean much more than that. We can think of the name as referring to something like a deity whose symbolic task is to unite and the divine and the satanic. The erudite little man eagerly went on with his splendid lecture, but none of the students paid much attention, and since the name did not come up again, I too soon turned my attention back to myself. To unite the divine and the satanic. The words resounded within me. Here was a place to start. I was familiar with that idea from the conversations I'd had with Demian in the last phase of our friendship. He had said that the god we worshipped represented only an arbitrarily sectioned off half of the world, the official, permitted world, the world of light, but we should worship the whole world. So either we needed a God who was also the devil, or we needed to establish devil services along with the church services that honored God. And so here was the God who was devil and God in one, Abraxas. I eagerly tried to follow this trail for some time, but I didn't get anywhere. I rummaged through whole libraries looking for more information about Abraxas without success. Well, my nature was never one for this consciously directed seeking, the kind where at first you find only truths that lie in your hand like a dead weight. The figure of Beatrice I had thought so much and so deeply about for a time now gradually subsided, or rather strode slowly away from me, getting closer and closer to the horizon and becoming ever more shadowy, pale, and distant. She no longer satisfied the longings in my soul. Then a new formation began to emerge in the life I was strangely both sleepwalking through and spinning inside myself. A longing for life blossomed within me, or rather a longing for love. The sexual urges I had been able to dispel for a while with my worship of Beatrice began to clamor for new objects, new images. Again, it found no fulfillment, but I was even less able than before to deny these feelings or hope that the girls my schoolmates used to try their luck with might satisfy them. Again, I had intense dreams, and the truth was I dreamed them more by day than at night. Ideas, images, or wishes rose up in me and pulled me away from the outside world to the point where my relationship with these pictures inside me, these dreams and shadows, were truer and more vital than those I had with my true surroundings. One particular recurring dream or play of the imagination became very meaningful for me. It was the most important and lasting dream of my life, and it went something like this. I was returning to my father's house, the heraldic bird glowing yellow on a blue background above the door. My mother came up to me from inside the house, but when I went in and tried to hug her, it wasn't her. It was someone I had never seen, big and powerful, resembling Max Demian in the picture I had painted, but different from them, and absolutely, completely feminine, despite its great power. This figure pulled me to her and took me in a deep, trembling embrace. Bliss mingled with horror. The embrace was in the service of God and also a terrible crime. There was too much about the figure wrapping me in her arms that recalled my mother, too much, too, that recalled my friend Demian. Her embrace violated every kind of reverence and was nonetheless blissful salvation. I often woke up from this dream with a deep sense of happiness, often in deathly terror, and with a tortured conscience, as though I had committed a horrible sin. Only gradually and unconsciously did this entirely interior image start to seem linked to the hint I had received from without about the God I should seek. But then the link grew tighter and deeper, and I began to feel that this dream premonition was nothing other than a summoning of Abraxas. Bliss and horror, man and woman blended together. The most sacred holiness intertwined with the most hideous abomination, deep guilt flashing through the loveliest innocence. Such was the image I saw in my sex dream, and so too was Abraxas. Love was no longer either the dark, animalistic drive I had fearfully felt it to be at first, or the pious spiritual worship I had offered up into the image of Beatrice. It was both and much more, angelic and satanic, man and woman in one, human and animal, the highest good and the uttermost evil. To live this love seemed to be my destiny, to taste of it my fate. I longed for it and was terrified of it at the same time, but it was always there, always above me. The next spring, I was due to graduate high school and go to university, although I did not know where, nor what I should study. I had a thin mustache on my upper lip. I was a grown man, and yet utterly aimless and helpless. My only certainty was the voice within me, the dream image. I felt a duty to follow its lead, blindly. But it was hard, and every day I rebelled against it again. Maybe I was crazy, I often thought. Maybe I was not like other people. Still, I could do everything the others did, without much effort. Read Plato, solve trigonometry problems, follow a chemical analysis. There was only one thing I couldn't do: wrest the darkly hidden goal from inside me and see it before me, the way others did. The ones who knew they wanted to be professors or lawyers, doctors or artists, who knew how long their path would take and what advantages it would bring. That was what I could not do. Maybe I too would become one of those things someday, but how could I know? Or maybe I would search and search for years and nothing would come of me. I would reach no goal at all. Or maybe I would reach a goal, but it would turn out to be wicked, dangerous, terrible. All I wanted to do was try to live the life that was inside me, trying to get out. Why was that so hard? I tried many times to paint the love image from my dream in all her power. I never succeeded. If I had, I would have sent the picture to Demian. Where was he? I didn't know. I knew only that he and I were linked. When would I see him again? The happy tranquility of the weeks and months of my Beatrice period were long since gone. At the time, I thought I had reached an island of peace, but it was always the same. No sooner had I gotten used to a situation, no sooner had a dream helped me a little, than it too shriveled and went blind. No use complaining. Now I was living in a raging fire of unsatisfied longings and tense waiting that often left me completely wild, almost insane. I saw the image of my dream lover before my eyes, clearer than life, much more clearly than I could see my own hand. I talked to it, cried before it, cursed it. I called it mother and kneeled before it in tears, called it beloved, and foresaw its ripe, all fulfilling kiss, called it devil and whore, vampire and murderer. It lured me into the most tender and beautiful dreams and into vile shamelessness. Nothing was too good and precious for it, nothing too low and bad. I spent that whole winter in an inner turmoil I find hard to describe. I had long since grown used to solitude, so I was not oppressed by loneliness. I lived with Demian, with the sparrowhawk, with the image of the tremendous dream shape that was both my fate and my beloved. That was enough for me, because everything in my life looked out into vast open spaces. Everything pointed to Abraxas, but none of these dreams and thoughts were mine. I could not summon them up at will or give them whatever color I wanted. They came and took possession of me. I was ruled by them. My life was lived by them. At least I had nothing to fear from the outside world. I was not afraid of anyone, and my schoolmates knew it too. They treated me with a furtive respect that often made me laugh. I could see right through most of them whenever I wanted, and I sometimes startled and amazed them by doing so, but I rarely or never wanted to. I cared only about myself, always myself, but I desperately yearned to someday, at long last, live a little too, to put something of myself out into the world, to struggle against, to connect with that world. Sometimes, wandering the streets at night, too restless to go back home before midnight, I thought that now, I would have to see my beloved crossing the street or the next corner or calling to me from the next window. At other times, my whole existence felt like unbearable torture, and I was prepared to take my own life. Then I found a strange refuge, by chance, as they say. But there is no such thing as chance in such matters. When someone needs something and then finds what he needs, it is not chance that has put it in his hands. Rather, he himself, his own longing and need, leads him to it. 2 or 3 times on my walks through the city, I had heard organ music from a small church at the edge of town. I hadn't stopped, but the next time I passed by, I heard it again and recognized the music as Bach. I walked up to the gate, which was locked, and since the road was almost empty of people, I sat down on a bollard next to the church, pulled the collar of my coat around me, and listened. It was not a great organ, but it was a good one, and it was being played marvelously, with a strange, highly personal expression of will and insistence that made it sound like a prayer. I had the feeling that man knows about a buried treasure hidden in this music, and he is wooing and pounding and striving with all his might for this treasure, like his life depended on it. I do not understand much about music in a technical sense, but ever since I was a child, I have instinctively understood this expression of the soul and felt musical things inside me as natural and self evident. Then the organist played something modern, maybe Max Reger or someone like that. The church was almost completely dark, with only a very thin light coming out of the nearby window. I waited until the music was over, then paced back and forth until I saw the organist leave the church. He was still young, but older than I was, stocky and burly in shape, and he walked quickly away with powerful but somehow reluctant footsteps. From that point on, I sat or walked back and forth in front of the church every now and then. One time I found the door open and sat in the pews for a half an hour, shivering and happy, while the organist played up above in the poor light of a gas lamp. In every piece of music he played, I heard more than the piece itself. It seemed as though everything he played was related, mysteriously connected. Everything he played was religious, was devotional and pious, but not pious like the churchgoers and the pastors. It was pious like pilgrims and beggars in the Middle Ages, unconditionally devoted to a feeling for the world that transcends all creeds. The old masters who came before Bach were played often, and old Italians, and all of them said the same thing, said what the musician had in his soul too: yearning, a sincere grasping at the world combined with desperately cutting oneself off from it, a fervent hearkening to one's own dark soul, the frenzy of devotion, and a profound curiosity about the miraculous. One time, when I secretly followed the organist after he left the church, I saw him go into a little tavern a long way from the center of town. I couldn't resist. I followed him in. I got my first good look at him. He was sitting at a table in a corner of the small room, a black felt hat on his head and a jug of wine in front of him. His face was just as I had expected: ugly and a little wild, searching and inflexible, stubborn and willful, but soft and childlike around the mouth. All the masculinity and strength of that face lay in the eyes and the brow. The lower half of the face was delicate and unfinished, lacking in self control, almost effeminate. The chin indecisive and boyish, as though in protest against the forehead and the gaze. I liked his dark brown eyes, full of ferocity and pride. I sat down across from him without a word. There was no one else in the bar. He looked at me as though trying to make me go away, but I stood firm and looked back at him, unblinking, until he grumbled, "What are you staring at? What do you want from me?" "I don't want anything from you," I said, "but I've already gotten a lot from you." He furrowed his brow. "So, you're a music enthusiast. I think it's disgusting when people go into raptures about music." I didn't let him scare me off. "I've listened to you play in the church many times," I said. "I don't want to disturb you, by the way. I just thought I might find something in you, something special. I don't know exactly what, but don't pay any attention to me. I can just listen to you in the church. I always lock up. You forgot to the other day, and I sat inside. Usually I stand outside or sit on the bollard." "Really? You can come inside next time. It's warmer. Just knock on the door, but knock hard, and not while I'm playing. And now, out with it. What are you trying to say? You're a very young man, probably in high school or university. Are you a musician?" "No. I like to listen to music, but only the kind you play. Absolute music, the kind where you can feel someone rattling the gates of heaven and hell. I think I like music because it has so little to do with morality. Everything else is moral or immoral, and I am looking for something that isn't. Morality has only ever made me suffer. I'm not expressing myself very well. Did you know that there needs to be a God who is God and devil at once? I have heard it said that there once was a God like that." The musician pushed his wide hat back on his head and shook his dark hair off his broad forehead. He leaned over the table toward me and gave me a penetrating look. With bated breath, he asked, "What is the name of this God you are talking about?" "I hardly know anything about him. Actually, nothing except his name. He is called Abraxas." The musician looked around suspiciously, as though someone might be eavesdropping. Then he moved closer to me and said in a whisper, "I thought so. Who are you?" "I'm a student at the high school." "How do you know about Abraxas?" "By chance." He pounded the table with his fist so hard that some wine spilled out of his glass. "Chance! Don't talk such shit. Such nonsense, young man. No one has heard of Abraxas by chance. You know that yourself. I will tell you more about him. I know a little about him." He fell silent and slid his chair back. As I looked at him expectantly, he made a face. "Not here. Another time. Here, have some." He reached into the pocket of his coat, which he hadn't taken off, and pulled out a couple roasted chestnuts that he tossed at me. I didn't say anything. I took them, ate them, and was satisfied. "So," he whispered after a while, "how did you hear of him?" I did not hesitate to tell him. "I was alone and didn't know what to do," I said. Then I remembered a friend from years ago who was very wise, I thought. I had painted something, a bird coming out of a globe. I sent it to him. After a while, when I had stopped really believing I would hear from him, I found a sheet of paper that said, "The bird fights its way out of the egg. The egg is the world. Whoever wants to be born must destroy a world. The bird flies to God. The God is called Abraxas." He didn't respond. We peeled our chestnuts and ate them with wine. Should we have more wine? He asked. No, thank you. I don't like to drink. He laughed, a bit disappointed. As you wish. I don't feel that way. I'll stay here. Now go. The next time I went to hear him play the organ, he didn't say much. He took me up an old alleyway and led me through a stately old house into a big, rather dark and desolate room, where there was nothing to suggest music except a piano, while a large bookcase and writing desk gave the room an intellectual air. You have so many books, I said with admiration. Some of them are my father's library. I live here with him. Yes, young man, I live here with my father and mother, but I can't introduce you to them. My acquaintances do not meet with much respect in this house. My father is an extremely honored citizen of this city, an important pastor and preacher, and just so you know, I am his gifted and promising son who unfortunately went off the rails and to some extent mad. I was a theology student, but just before my exams I left that upright discipline. Actually, though, I still do study that field, at least in terms of my private reading. I have always found the kinds of gods that people have come up with in different places and times an extremely interesting and important topic. Anyway, I am a musician now, and it looks like I will be given a modest position as an organist soon. Then I'll be back in the church after all. I scanned the spines of the books and saw Greek, Latin, and Hebrew titles, as far as I could tell in the weak light of the little desk lamp. Meanwhile, my new acquaintance had lain down on the floor near the wall in the dark and was doing something there. Come here, he called after a while. We're going to do a little philosophy now. That means keep your mouth shut, lie on your stomach, and think. He struck a match and lit the paper and wood in the fireplace he was lying in front of. The flames shot up, and he fanned and fed the fire with exceptional care. I lay down next to him, on the threadbare carpet. He stared into the fire, which soon absorbed me too, and we lay there in silence on our stomachs in front of the flickering wood fire for probably an hour, watching it blaze and roar, writhe and subside, flutter and flicker, and finally brood on the bottom of the fireplace in a silent, sunken glow. Fire worship was not the dumbest idea anybody ever had, he murmured at one point to no one in particular. Other than that, neither of us said a word. With my eyes fixed on the fire, I sank into dream and silence, saw shapes in the smoke and images in the ashes. One time I was startled. When he threw a piece of resin into the embers, a narrow little tongue of fire shot up, and I saw in it the bird with the yellow sparrowhawk's head. Golden glowing threads ran together into nets in the dying embers in the fireplace. Letters of the alphabet and pictures appeared, shapes recalling faces, animals, plants, worms, and snakes. When I came to and looked at the man next to me, he was staring with fanatical devotion into the ashes, his chin on his fists. I have to go now, I said softly. All right, then go. See you later. He did not stand up, and since the lamp was out, I had to feel my way laboriously through the dark room and down the dark hallways and staircases out of the enchanted old house. Out on the street, I stopped and looked back up at it. Every window was dark. A little brass plaque gleamed in the light of the gas lamps by the door. Pistorius, head vicar, I read. Only when I sat down for dinner alone in my little room did I realize that I had learned nothing about either Abraxas or Pistorius, since we hadn't exchanged even a dozen words. Still, I was very happy with my visit to his house, and he had promised me a perfectly exquisite piece of old organ music for the next time I heard him play, a Passacaglia by Buxtehude.